This man has an 8 to 10 year history of killing women all across the country.
An employee coming in just after 8 this morning made the horrible discovery. 4 employees of the Malibu Grand Prix stabbed to death.
She doesn't dispute that she stabbed her husband a staggering 193 times.
Harris's 16-year-old daughter witnessed her stepmother run the wheels of her Mercedes over her dad several times.
Police say the suspect may be responsible for the murders of at least 6 women.
Welcome back to another episode of The Evidence Room. Believe it or not, there was a time in Texas where prisons were revolving doors. Violent offenders were barely serving fractions of their sentence because they were allowed to accrue so-called good time. Essentially, that worked by every day that a prisoner behaved themselves behind bars, not exactly a high bar to clear, they got to knock a day off the amount of time that they were required to stay in prison before the state had to release them on parole. Carl Watts, a.k.a. Coral Watts, a.k.a. the Sunday morning slasher, fell into that category. Watts was born in Killeen, Texas, and he is believed to have killed dozens of women during an 8-year period in Texas and in Michigan. It all finally came to an end in 1982.
Like thousands of others, Coral Watts pulled up stakes and journeyed to Texas. He came from Michigan, March 1981. Homecoming for Watts, who says he was born in Fort Hood, Texas, 1953. A lot has changed since then. He left the state as a kid, but has returned as a confessed killer.
Watts very nearly became the only serial killer in U.S. history to be released from prison. That is until a nationwide campaign was launched to keep him behind bars. Now, we're very lucky today to be joined by Joanna Nicolau. She is the sister of Elena Semander. Unfortunately, I know Elena was one of Watts's victims in 1982. We're also joined by Director of Victim Services for Houston Crime Stoppers, Andy Kahn. Andy worked with all of these families to make sure that Watts never got out of prison. So I'd like to begin. Tell us about your sister.
So Elena was the oldest of 4 siblings. She was my oldest sister by 5 years. She was 20 just a week before her 21st birthday when she was murdered by Coral Watts. She was athletic. She had a field hockey scholarship at the University of Denver, and then she transferred back to Houston. She kind of missed Texas, her Texas roots and her family. And she was currently a student at University of Houston. She was studying math and physical education. She was also an artist. She was very good with artwork, drawings, paintings, and she loved sports, she loved family, she loved her faith and her church. And she was just kind of larger than life, being an older sister. Still, 41 years later, I still envision her as my older sister, which I know may sound strange, but just a person who gave good advice, sound advice, but she was also kind of a free spirit.
The one thing I always look back on, Elena will never come back, and that's what I really miss.
Elena's murder has changed her whole family's life. Her father hopes to save others from his family's grief.
Don't go out by yourself at night, because there are a lot of crazy people out there, and you're just putting yourself in jeopardy.
How did your sister and Watts even cross paths?
Well, he selected her at random, just like he did all of his victims. He just saw her driving at night and followed her.
God, that's frightening. Where was she living at the time in Houston?
She was at our house, our family house in Houston.
She was attacked there?
No, she was. She had been out with some friends from church. There was a big group of them on a Saturday night that had gone to dinner and gone out to a nightclub. And then afterwards, some of them were going to go eat breakfast. I can't remember the name of the place. I don't think it was a Denny's or a JoJo's or something like that. But the friends that were with her said the line was too long, so they went back to her car, dropped her off, saw her get in the car. And then on the way home, she ended up stopping at some friends' apartments that they had not shown up. They were also Greek Orthodox, and they had not shown up. They had been at the Astros game, and back then in '82, there were no cell phones. You made plans, you stuck to your plans.
Right.
So if somebody didn't show up, she swung by their apartment to see, what was up. But they never heard her knocking or anything.
It seems that Watts had very different methods of killing. He stabbed some of his victims.
Three forms. He had three ways that he killed his victims. It was stabbing, strangulation, and drowning. He never sexually assaulted anybody, and if he took anything, they were very small trinkets for trophies. So robbery was not a motive as well. He was simply a cold-blooded killing machine.
Corporal Eugene Watts spent the day sitting at a conference table surrounded by police detectives and attorneys. They were behind closed doors on the 10th floor of the district attorney's building downtown. Watts told graphic stories describing when, where, and how he killed young women in Houston.
The details in his memory are absolutely uncanny. Of the 9 cases that we now attribute to him because of the information that he's provided us, it's just phenomenal.
The police and the district attorney who convinced him to talk are trying to clear up 18 murder cases, unsolved homicides that occurred after he arrived in Houston in March of 1981.
It's going to be bad. Yeah, we can't speculate on any number, but this has got a bad start.
How many murders do they believe that Watts committed?
I'm comfortable with saying he's credited with over 40 because when you add Texas and Michigan, he was aligned with about 22. There were also 5 in Windsor, Canada. He crossed the border. Yeah. They have footage of his car going back and forth from Detroit to Windsor, Canada. And several women in Canada ended up being dead. And some actually survived as well. One of them was also later able to identify him. So you have...
So that a woman in Canada identified him who survived an attack.
Correct.
How did he finally get caught?
Wow, Robert, I mean, that's one of the most incredible stories that I've ever heard. So Watts had murdered a young woman, Michelle Madej, earlier that morning. He drowned her in a bathtub. That evening, Lori Lister is walking up to her apartment in Spring Branch. Watts comes from behind, grabs her, chokes her, renders her unconscious, and opens her apartment door. Watts is surprised because Lori has a roommate. Lori's roommate, 19-year-old Melinda Aguilar, who's 5'2", 90 pounds. Watts gets in there, throws Melinda to the ground, grabs her, ties her hands behind her back, throws her into the back bedroom, closes the door, and then starts dragging Lori to the bathtub and fill it with water. Watts would go back and check to see if Melinda was still there. Melinda faked that she was unconscious. Melinda gets up. Keep in mind, her hands are bound, and she kicks open the balcony door on the 2nd floor. And she, as she said, she knew she had to do something because if not, Lori was going to be number 14, and she was going to be number 15 in his string of killings. She gets up on the balcony, she jumps, does a somersault, and she lands, and she just starts running. Evidently, neighbors had heard commotion, and they called the Houston Police Department.
She jumped from the 2nd floor with her hands tied behind her back?
With her hands bound.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's why she didn't break her legs or break her neck.
It was, like I said, it was an act of God that she wasn't hurt and was able to actually get up. Very shortly after, she ran into a Houston police officer. They run up to the stairs. Watts goes back to look for Melinda and sees her gone. Panics, flees. They see him fleeing. Chase ensues. They ended up capturing him. They went back. Lori was revived from the bathtub. She does not remember anything to this day, with the exception of being grabbed behind and rendered unconscious. She survived.
How did that all start to come about that, okay, this man who just attacked these 2 girls actually is a pretty prolific serial killer in 2 states?
You know, when Watts originally, basically spent most of his life in Michigan. Mm-hmm. He was a suspect in numerous murders in Michigan, and hence was given the nickname the Sunday Morning Slasher because of his propensity to kill on a Sunday morning. A lot of police departments there zoned in on Watts, but the old adage, knowing who did it and proving who did it, were 2 different stories. And they set up surveillance on Watts, and it got so heated for him, he just decided to leave town. He ended up in Houston, which in 1981, if you're going to be a serial killer, Houston was the place to be.
Yeah, the crime rate was...
And we were the murder capital of the country back then. But actually one of the police officers, Paul Bunton, who was now the chief of Saline, found out Watts was here.
In Michigan?
He found out Watts had came here, and he wanted to alert Houston officials.
Okay.
He actually put together a dossier. He sent it down to Houston Homicide and said, this is a bad guy. We have him suspect in numerous murders. You need to keep an eye on him.
I got to imagine it's hard to just put 24 hours, 7 day a week indefinite surveillance on somebody.
But you'd think they'd put surveillance on somebody at least on Saturday nights, Sunday mornings, when that's when all
Sunday
the murders are happening,
right.
not Monday through Friday.
They did for some months. One of the officers, a retired officer obviously now, Doug Bostock, tailed him, followed him. They even put something in his car to keep track of his whereabouts. They talked to his employers. So they did, pretty much what they could do, but keep in mind back then they were so understaffed, they were so overwhelmed because of all the homicides, you couldn't do this 24/7, and Watts knew he was being, followed and tagged.
Well, maybe they just couldn't do it, 24 hours a day, but then again, when you think about it, if they had, then, 9 girls would still be living today, at least 9 that we know of, if not more. Just one life saved is, well, it's invaluable, really.
Now, when after your sister was murdered, it's my understanding from talking to Annie, your mom really held elected officials' feet to the fire.
After she was murdered, my mother was very involved in just waiting for opening the Sunday morning paper. Again, this is before the internet, right? And then she would see if there was a murder. She'd reach out to that family, and they'd try to see if there were any connections between the daughters, right, between the families.
She started keeping track of girls
So
that
your
were
mom
murdered.
was doing her own detective work
Absolutely,
in a way. Wow.
yeah. She wasn't getting any answers from anybody about anything, so she started doing her own investigative work to try to find out who murdered her daughter. And so my sister was murdered in February, and the incident with Lori and Melinda happened in May. So during that time frame, my mother was trying to just gather her own information. And then after he was apprehended, he confessed in August. She was trying to find who did this herself, which I think most parents are probably like that, if you're not getting any answers. And you're seeing that there's all these murders happening to these young women.
She knew there was a
weekend.
pattern. She knew there was a pattern.
She felt there was a pattern, but she was told it was not connected. She was told by the police chief then that absolutely there's no way there's one person doing this. She felt that there should be a public warning that went out to young women, but the officials
she didn't buy it.
didn't.
She didn't care what she
No,
she
so
didn't care.
the news media would not be uncommon for me to come home from school and there's news vans in front of our house because my mother would talk. I mean, she was not going to not say what she thought was going on, even though the officials would say, no, there's no way there's a serial killer in our streets. She thought differently.
Clearly she knew better at that time.
She just knew something was not right.
Why did he start confessing?
That's a question only he could answer. For whatever reason, when they brought him into the interrogation room, he just started talking. And as the detective said, he wouldn't stop talking. And the detectives that I got to know, Tom Ladd and his brother Jim Ladd, were saying he had an uncanny memory for remembering every single detail on all the Houston area women that he killed. But they didn't have any, quote, physical evidence to tie him in. You didn't have cameras back then.
One of the things we talk about, we call this the evidence room, but really we're talking about the county archive of court exhibits in the cases. And the thing that was amazing to me is there wasn't a lot left on this case. On really many of the cases involving Coral Watts, there's not a lot left. One of the things that was left, though, is it's an old memo from the Houston Police Department written August 21st, 1982, and it's a list of all the crimes that they believe Watts committed. And it starts in October, Halloween, 1979, Grosse Pointe Farms, Michigan. Then it goes Harris County, Travis County, Galveston County, Waller County, murders 13, attempted murders 5, assaults 1. So these are all the crimes that Houston police thought that he had committed at that time.
He was connected to all those, and the victims' ages ranged from 14 to 40.
when it finally came out in August, I've got to imagine your family's already devastated by the loss of Elena. Then it comes out, your mom was right all along. That must have been an infuriating moment.
I think there was relief, but vindication as well, but you'd think it would stop there, but really that's just where the story begins. Right. So yeah, she wanted answers. She
went down to City Hall.
She went,
right?
She made a lot of appointments. She had people over the house. She wanted answers. I think it took us 6 years just to get the confession.
Just to actually read the confession?
Yes, 6 years.
Nobody put together that you had all these women that were getting murdered all over the city, all over the county. And there
Multiple
was
counties.
no pattern, no rhyme, no reason, and nobody put that together, period. So nobody was willing to come out and say, hey, Houston, we got a serial killer loose.
Yeah.
Nobody knew.
Okay, so he gives his confession. It was a plea deal, right? What did he get after he confessed?
He got 60 years for burglary with intent to commit murder on Lori Lister, the one who was choked and tried. So it's not even a murder conviction. If you look strictly at the conviction, which caused us a great deal of concern later on, it just looks like, wow, burglary with intent to commit murder.
So was he given like a immunity? Like, okay, we'll get you on this one. We'll give you a pass on all these as long as you tell us everything.
Correct. He was given total immunity on all of Harris County cases.
Were the families told about that prior to that deal being made?
I think being told and really understanding are two different things.
Okay.
I could care less if you act good or don't act good in the Texas Department of Corrections. I don't care if the slightest thing you do is spit on the side of the wall. If you do not act well, it is my suggestion to the Texas Department of Corrections that they put you so deep into the penitentiary they'll have to pipe sunlight into you, and that you serve each and every minute of the 60 years that this court is going to assess against you.
Yes, I was very impressed with Judge Shaver and his comments in the end.
Do you think justice has been served?
No, of course not.
Limited justice?
Limited.
When you talk about, my mother is not an attorney.
Right.
My mother has, 2 years of education at SMU as an artist, and she was a secretary. So, she didn't understand. Right. She actually, I think, is quoted as saying, I thought you would just put your fingers behind your back and cross them and say, ha, gotcha. Like, she had no idea what it meant to plea bargain.
Back then, I think families were saying, okay, 60 years is 60 years. He's never going to breathe free air again.
Right, because of his age, he would die.
Watts was also willing to confess to all the murders in Michigan. And Michigan officials rejected any plea offer.
So the assumption I'm going off of at this point is they got their confessions, they got the 60 years, he's in prison. Okay.
He led authorities to where he buried bodies too.
3 bodies.
Right. So they get to close a bunch of cases. He's in prison. Moving on now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But for the families, that's, as you said, that was only the beginning.
Well, we were told that because he had a deadly weapon charge, the bathtub of water, that he would have to serve 1/3 of the sentence. That's how the law read. It wasn't until 1987 where there was a different case that was appealed based on a criminal who was not told that there was a deadly weapon charge at the time of his trial. And so that became some sort of an appeal that then Watts became a part of. They made it retroactive, where if you did not inform the criminal of a deadly weapon charge, then that can get thrown out.
So a completely separate criminal, nothing to do at all with Watts.
Right.
Had an appeal that I was not informed that you were going to attach a deadly weapon charge to what I'm charged with, and because you did that, that's unfair.
Watts became, a jailhouse lawyer, and he latched onto that and filed his own appeal based on the fact that he and his attorneys were never told that the water was going to be stipulated as a deadly weapon.
That's the water in the bathtub when
Correct.
He tried to drown.
Water in the bathtub was now a deadly weapon, and so Watts won the appeal, and because he won the appeal, he was basically eligible for parole as, quote, a nonviolent offender.
That changed his status.
Even though it was still burglary with the intent to commit murder.
There's no deadly weapon.
That's got to be devastating.
Yes, which is interesting because, as you said earlier, he usually strangled people too. Like, he strangled my sister. He is the deadly weapon.
Right.
You don't need a bathtub of water. If he's there, he's the deadly weapon. That's the way I see it. So he became eligible for parole. I don't remember exactly when Andy entered the picture, but it was around that time.
It was his second parole review.
Okay.
And at that time, I was appointed as the mayor's victim advocate in the mayor's office, and I got to know your mom through Parents of Murdered Children meetings. I started attending the meeting, and I'll never forget when your mom called me because he was coming up for parole again.
Yeah.
And it was 92, and because I come from that system, I know a little bit more about questions to ask that no one else will ask. And I'll never forget calling your mom, and I said, Harriet, I said, parole is the least of your problems. Under Texas law, he has an automatic mandatory release date somewhere around the year 2006. And by Texas law, assuming he maintains good behavior in prison, he's walking out. No ifs, ands, or buts. So, parole isn't going to be the issue. No one's going to parole him. This is the looming issue. None of the families knew that. None of them were told that when the plea deal was made, that under Texas law, he would eventually walk out of prison. I had that, quote, dubious honor of doing that.
So that's how he almost became the first serial killer in U.S. history to legally
that
be released
opened
from
up
prison.
the doors. Like, there's a mandatory release law that Watts was subjected to, and then that became a rallying cry in the gubernatorial race. In 1994, in the state of Texas, you had the incumbent governor, Ann Richards, versus George W. Bush. Bush campaigned. I still have his press releases. Campaigned on the issue of abolishing mandatory release. And Watts, for obvious reasons, was the poster child.
I was going to say he had to have been.
Right, Watts was here. This is why we need to do that.
He was one of the ones that led to the so-called good time being abolished for violent offenders.
Correct.
Okay. And the mandatory release laws.
My mother had no idea that even existed. So she was focusing more on the parole hearings, which were, the parole hearings were coming up like every 2 to 3 years. So, I mean, it's work. It's getting signatures. I remember since my sister was a student at University of Houston, I set up a little table, outside, and a picture of her. This was a student here. This happened many years ago, but she was murdered by a serial killer. Will you please sign this petition? So those were the types of things that we were doing. And then my mother felt a deep conviction to kind of speak up, not just for Elena, but for all the victims.
She carried the torch for everybody.
She carried the torch for everybody. She felt that responsibility, and she took it very seriously. What started out as just being for her own daughter ended up being she represented all the voices that weren't there anymore.
When you finally informed everybody, including Elena's family, that, hey, he's getting out no matter what in 2006, what happened then?
So after we tried to get the law passed, and we couldn't do it retroactively, I don't know, we were really bummed for a year. We didn't know what to do, and then all of a sudden you get one of these great ideas, and it was 2002. And your mom and I and Justice for All at that time, the organization, we came up with this 20th memorial anniversary celebration. It was 20 years basically since all the murders took place. And at that time we said, you know what, we're putting Watts back on the map. And so we got families in from all over the country, surviving family members. At that time, Continental Airlines, which is what they were called, they were very gracious. They donated airfare. We had families that flew in from Washington, Iowa, Michigan, Massachusetts, and then all the families from Texas that descended on the church that your mom and your family belonged to. And we brought in everybody, and we got a lot of attention because we had all the families. We had the police officer that ended up arresting Watts as well. Everybody was watching, and this became big news. And it got, somehow, Michigan authorities were informed of what was happening. And I remember I got a call after the call to action, and I got a call from Michigan law enforcement officials, going, oh my God, we need to do something. So they end up forming a cold case task force because, as we discussed earlier, Watts was a suspect in numerous murders here. But they didn't know he was getting out, like nobody did. And now they knew, and now it's up to Michigan. Michigan became basically...
So it was a race to basically pin a new case on him.
We have 4 years. This was 2002. We have 4 years to find something on him, to charge him with, to keep him from being the first serial killer to be released in this country's history. And the clock was ticking.
After that memorial service, which ended with the call to action, a lot of press, we did a lot of different shows, and I remember people saying, there's no way Texas is going to let him out. There's no way. You'll have the death penalty, you kill people all the time. This isn't going to happen. They didn't believe us.
He kept so far under the radar. One of the PIOs from TDCJ, they would occasionally get media requests, and he would never give an interview. And finally they asked him, how come you don't want? He said, there's no reason for me to talk because I'm getting out.
He knew.
He knew.
He knew the law.
He knew he was getting out, and we just decided, you know what? If we were going to legally release a serial killer, we're going to go down kicking, screaming, fighting, and the whole world is going to know about it.
Yeah.
And the whole world was starting to pay attention at that time.
So I guess the strategy was just blitz the country, Michigan, Texas, with stories about this serial killer that's about to walk free.
People magazine even did a story on Melinda and Lori, the two girls that survived.
Yeah.
They came down and did a story with them, and they had Willie Kill Again on this as well. So fast forward, we're 2004, Michigan's getting nowhere. I mean, they had all these cases that they were trying to pin him to, but they couldn't find anything. It was frustrating for them, it was frustrating for us, because now it's 2004 and it's getting close. The clock is ticking. So we did a segment for the Today Show, and they reran it that evening on MSNBC. And if you don't believe in divine intervention, the story I'm about to tell you is going to change your mind. We did a segment for the Today Show, and they reran it that evening on MSNBC. And the Michigan Attorney General was on, and he was pleading for the public's help in an unsolved 1979 murder of Helen Dutcher. And they had a sketch of the suspect at that time, and they held it up. And this guy comes home from a suburb of Detroit, and he does what guys do. He picks up the remote, starts flipping channels, right? And he stops on that segment, and he literally froze. And he screams to his wife, that's the guy I saw kill the girl in the alley 25 years ago. The next day, he calls the Michigan Attorney General's office.
I'm guessing he was pretty convincing.
He was extremely
He had to have been. You said he
convincing.
spent like hours with the sketch artist in 1979.
Yes.
All those years later, 1979 to...
1982, he contacted when he was arrested in Texas. This eyewitness, Joe Foy, called authorities and said, that's the guy.
Because he saw him on TV. He saw the footage in '82 of him walking into the courtroom, and that's the first time he saw him.
But I guess, they at the time was like, well, what does it matter? He's caught down in Texas.
Yeah.
Exactly. So then he saw that footage again 22 years later, because they were showing the old footage. And they were saying this man is in a Texas prison, but will be released on mandatory release. And that's when he was flipping through, and he was like, oh my gosh, wait, this is the same footage. So yeah, it's just incredible.
Take me back to that moment when you got the call that we got one.
My mom was very, she felt like, okay, this might be, but when you've gone through that for so many times, like, oh, we've got this guy, we found the guy who murdered your daughter, oh, he's going to be locked away for 60 years. Well, actually 20 but for sure 20. Oh, he's up for parole after 5. I mean, you just don't believe anything you're told anymore.
So 2004, he's finally charged with the murder of Helen Dutcher in '79, and a lot of us went up there. We spent a lovely 2 weeks in Pontiac, Michigan. The Michigan authorities, they were so incredibly professional. They got the significance of what was happening. They understood that if they didn't get this and that they didn't get it right, he was going to walk free. And the chilling part about Watts is his own words that he used in 1982 after he was brought before the court. And as he was walking out of the courtroom, he turned around and said, you know, if they ever release me, I'm going to kill again. When they extradited him back to Michigan, this is another scary part. I don't think probably people don't even know about. When they searched his cell, they found newspaper clippings with women with their eyes cut out, because that was his excuse why he picked out the women he did, which was totally random. And when investigators were asking, why did you pick this one? And he would just say, they had evil in their eyes, which was a bunch of BS.
Dr. Jerome Sherman examined Watts after his arrest.
If I go out and I think you are evil, then I am going to help the world by doing something negative to you, killing you or some kind of violence.
This man perceived women as being evil.
Yes.
She saw that the human face of Coral Eugene Watts is nothing more than a mask for an evil so dark that your worst nightmare pales in comparison.
And as much as you may hate Mr. Watts, the integrity of our judicial system is fundamentally far more important than convicting Mr. Watts.
I did not go to the trial. I had recently had my 3rd child, but my brother and sister, who now live in California, they went with my mother to the trial with Andy, with a lot of other people, and just meeting this eyewitness and knowing what we went through as a family of, a sister who was murdered by a serial killer, or, your daughter who was murdered by a serial killer. But to meet this individual who was an eyewitness, who tried several times to come forward and help Helen Dutcher's case, or, and her family, who he didn't know. He didn't meet, I guess the sisters were there at the trial, so he got to finally meet. But to hear what he had lived through for all those years, having that in him and not being able to help anybody.
He's convicted. I mean, from what I read, it didn't take the jury long to deliberate before they found him guilty.
Obviously, there was a lot at stake at the trial, but Michigan authorities did something I've never seen before, and they allowed his prior bad acts to be used in the evidentiary phase of the trial.
So the Michigan jury got to hear about everything he did down in Texas.
Yes, they did.
I wouldn't even begin to try and guess at the level of relief your mom felt when he was found guilty.
When she got back, it wasn't but maybe a couple of days later, my phone rings, I'm at home, I answer the phone, and she's like, okay, what do we do now? And I was like, no. We rest. We're done. She said, no, I've been told that before. I don't believe them. I do not. They don't have the death penalty there. I don't know, life in prison. I don't know what that means up there. What do we do next? I said, no, he has to try to get out. It's on him now. He has a life sentence, so he has to figure out what he's gonna do. You're done. You can do something else now. But it wasn't until he died in prison a few years later, got another phone call, and she was crying, and she said, I have my life back. She never thought she'd outlive him. She literally, and then that's when it hit me. I was like, wow, this consumed her. It consumed her life. She never thought she'd outlive him. She was 48 when my sister died. He was 28. She was 20 years older. She just figured the rest of her life, this man's gonna be in my life.
And there was another trial even after that one, right?
They also convicted him of the murder of Gloria Steele, a Western Michigan University student in Kalamazoo. For me, as a victim advocate for over 30 years and doing a lot of different things, I get asked, well, what's the biggest thing that you've ever done in your career? I don't hesitate 1 second. I say keeping a serial killer from being legally released. That will be I don't think anything will ever top that because nobody gave us a snowball's chance in hell.
He gets convicted on the second murder case. You said the Michigan student. How long after did he die?
It was 1 year after.
Yeah, it wasn't long after.
2007.
So he died in 2007. You said it was prostate cancer?
Yes.
So I'm assuming that's when your mom made that call that said, I finally got my life back.
Yes, and that's when I realized, wow, this was her life. It took over her life. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't ever hear her say that. So to hear her say that, you know, she had, I guess, 4 grandchildren at the time. She didn't have her 5th yet, but she was able to move on, finally, after decades.
But it's still part of your family's life now with the work that your brother's doing.
My brother is a writer, so he was 12 when Elena was murdered, and he, you know, he doesn't remember ever not being the brother of a victim of a serial killer. When he went to college, he majored in screenplay writing, and he worked on this as a feature film, as a novel. He wasn't sure what to do with it. Literally 30 years later, he was working on a project with a friend that's a producer director, and the friend was like, well, what else you got, you know? And he's like, I don't have anything else. I haven't really been writing for a while. I've got this one thing, but it's in this drawer. It's not ready. It's not ready. And Andrew's like, well, what is it? I know, I don't want anybody to see it yet. And he's, you know, and so he convinced, Andrew convinced him to send it to him. And Andrew, who's also in our Greek Orthodox Church community, but is much younger, he wasn't aware of this, you know, and he reads John's script, and the opening page of the script is the headline of Watts's confession day, and John has been able to make it a story about our family and kind of what a victim's family goes through and how you do all handle it a little differently.
So is it a novel, a short film, a series?
He's written an 8-part series. It's called Empty Chairs, or you can go to Instagram at @emptychairs_the series.
I'd like to thank you both, Joanna, Andy. As always, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this with us. Thank you. That's it for this week's episode of The Evidence Room. We're going to be back next Wednesday again at 6:30. We're going to be talking about the murders of Jennifer Ertman and Elizabeth Pena. This is the 30th anniversary of those murders. These were 2 beautiful young girls who just took a shortcut to go home so they would make it home by curfew and unfortunately crossed paths with gang members. However, those young ladies did not die in vain. Their murders greatly advanced victims' rights in the state of Texas. We're going to go into that when another episode of The Evidence Room streams again next Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Remember, you can catch up on all past episodes of The Evidence Room by downloading the KPRC2 Plus app. Until next Wednesday, have a great rest of your week.